With the recent announcements of the Dalai Lama that he would indeed have a reincarnation and the response coming in from China, joining us to discuss all of this is Penpa Tsering, who is the head of the Tibetan government in exile. Thank you so much for speaking to us here at Times Now, sir. And as far as the recent announcement of Dalai Lama and the response from China is concerned, how are you looking at all of these developments? Because this is being seen as a historic announcement when it comes to the succession of the Dalai Lama on his 90th birthday.
The Chinese government will keep saying what they want to say. They don't bother about what the world has to say. They don't bother about the religious freedom of the Tibetan people. They not just occupied our country and blatantly suppress the Tibetans. And right now, the Chinese government is aiming at the elimination and destruction of Tibetan identity in the form of its language and culture and religion and all that. So it's not a surprise to hear things from the Chinese government. Of course, they have been saying it's a break from the tradition, but when they say it's a break from the tradition, what does that mean? That golden urn needs to be used. But it was something that the Manchus, when they had little influence in Tibet, introduced this in 1793. But it was rarely used. And whenever it was used, it was the selection has, through the traditional means, have already been done. So there are 3 points the Chinese government is making. One is that they will look for His Holiness reincarnation within China or within Tibet. And for that, His Holiness has always said, I will be born in a free world. Because when China, say, invites His Holiness to visit China and Tibet, His Holiness, their precondition is that His Holiness should stay back. And His Holiness has always been saying that if I get opportunity to go to China or Tibet, I will go, but I will not live there because there's no freedom there. So also the Chinese government says, when Chinese government says that they will choose for the next Dalai Lama within Tibet or China, that is the reason why His Holiness says he will be born in a free world. And in the case of using the golden urn, there have been 8 Dalai Lamas even before the golden urn. So what about those Dalai Lamas? Are they not Dalai Lamas just because Chinese government introduced golden urn for their political benefit? But even the Qings were Buddhists in a way. But the present government is a communist government that does not believe in any religion. So for that matter, I don't think they can fool the international community or the domestic audience within the country. And the Tibetans will definitely not accept any choice of the Chinese government or direct interference by the Chinese government in the selection of the next Dalai Lama, whenever it happens. But I want to make clear that His Holiness has reassured us many times that he will live for more than 2 decades and more. So it's still very early, according to us. Because His Holiness is committed to live long, and there are also provisions pre-signed that this Dalai Lama will live very long.
Right, and he's also spoken of messages that he's received from around the world, including in Tibet, to continue the institution. Can you tell us about how this decision was arrived at?
No, this is, of course, the prerogative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because he's the one who's going to be reborn whenever that happens. So His Holiness has decided, based on requests from Tibetans, from the Himalayan Buddhists, from the Greater Mongolia, including republics in the Russian republics of Kalmykia, Tuva, Buryat, and now so many new adherents and followers of His Holiness have sent requests, even from Chinese Buddhists through various means, requested His Holiness to continue with the institution of the Ganden Phodang, which is not only important for Tibet, but for the whole world, and also request for His Holiness to reincarnate. So the concept of reincarnation is very, very unique to Tibetan Buddhism, because there's so many Buddhist countries in this world, but Tibet is the only one that has this system of reincarnation. And the whole idea of reincarnation is to carry forward the legacy and the remaining work of the previous Lama. So in that respect, this announcement is very, very important, because His Holiness has said he could be the last Dalai Lama. Now it's confirmed that there would be Dalai Lamas in the future to come.
But before, in fact, this announcement, was there somewhat of uncertainty, as far as the future of the institution is concerned? Because when he had said that people should decide whether the reincarnation should continue, was there ever a sense within the Tibetan community, both in India as well as in Tibet, about the uncertainty in their own minds about the spiritual succession?
This, I think, yesterday, before His Holiness read the statement, also made some remarks that since 1969, His Holiness has been very consistent in his thinking that whether there should be a next Dalai Lama or not will be decided by the Tibetan people. But the Tibetan people inside Tibet does not have the freedom to express themselves. So they sent messages through various means to His Holiness office and the Religion and Culture Department here under the Central Tibetan Administration or the government in exile to express their wish of His Holiness reincarnation. So, but His Holiness has never said inside Tibet because there is no freedom right now. So His Holiness has always said it's for the Tibetans to decide. Now, only the Tibetans and diaspora community have the freedom to speak their mind. And over the last 1.5 years, we have been collecting statements, resolutions, requests, all of those from the various Tibetan communities outside Tibet, and then the larger Buddhist community in the Himalayas or in the Greater Mongolia and other areas. Then in the Buddhist associations in Europe, in different countries, which represents not just Tibetan Buddhism, but the Buddhist religion as a whole. And then you have governments like the United States government, which has made it into a law already by amending the 2002 Tibet Policy Act to Tibet Support and Policy Act of 2020, wherein they have included the element of His Holiness reincarnation. And within this year, as we celebrate His Holiness 90th birthday as the year of Tibet, a year of compassion, through this year, we'll be working with many freedom-loving democratic countries to issue similar statements, and I hope some statements will come in the next few days, and then we'll work on other governments to issue similar statements. That is how we are working with the international community in the free world,
Right.
to say what we have to say, and China will keep doing what they will do, but it'll be a lifelong headache if there are two Dalai Lamas in future, and they won't be Xi Jinping to resolve this because he won't be alive by that time.
Right, and you mentioned the golden urn insistence that's coming in from the Chinese government side and the approval of the central government there in Beijing, which they believe is in line with Chinese religious traditions. But do you see a sense of arrogance coming in from that statement from the Chinese representatives? Because it essentially implies that Tibetans have no autonomy in deciding who their spiritual head should be, and the Tibetan tradition should be subordinate to the will of the Chinese government. Doesn't that fundamentally capture the nub of the Tibet issue as well?
I think the Chinese government itself is contradicting itself because even if we talk about the golden urn, that was during the Qing when they were Buddhist. Now the Chinese government in China is a communist government that does not believe in any religion, and they want to be responsible for religious affairs. That is very absurd. It's unreasonable. Direct interference in the religious belief of the Tibetan people. It is the believers who will have to choose their spiritual masters, not a government that does not believe in any religion. So I think it's quite laughable.
Also, sir, you've said in an interview that Chinese insistence on appointing its own spiritual head for Tibet ignores the fundamentals of Tibetan Buddhism. Can you explain this?
First, to believe, to confirm living Buddhas, as they call it, first you have to believe in the concept of life after death. That is why His Holiness always said that if the Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation, then they should study Tibetan Buddhism, believe in the concept of life after death, and then they should look for Mao Zedong's reincarnation, Deng Xiaoping's reincarnation, maybe even Jiang Zemin these days because he's not with us. Then maybe the Dalai Lama. So His Holiness has a very humorous and a very nice way of responding to these difficult questions. And I think Chinese government understand very well what His Holiness is thinking, but they want to do their own thing for political means, which is not a surprise. So let us see who commands what kind of respect. Even in the case of Chinese Panchen Lama, he has not been able to travel outside China. maybe because he's not given the freedom to travel, or maybe because they think that he might run away if he's allowed to travel outside China. So he has been only to Thailand and Hong Kong for a brief period. So influence of Chinese Panchen Lama is nowhere to be seen internationally. And even in future, if there is a Dalai Lama born in the free world and one selected by the Chinese government, the one born in the free world will have all the freedom to travel all around the world, and the one chosen by China will not have the freedom to what he or she wants to do. So there lies the basic difference, and the whole idea of a communist government that does not believe in any religion to interfere in Tibetan religious affairs is unacceptable.
Right. Mr. Sering, you've also mentioned that you wish and, of course, hope for a long life for the Dalai Lama. But how does this process of selection of the next Dalai Lama really happen in terms of a time frame? How does it happen on ground? Because we're talking about the reincarnation process as well. We haven't seen something like this in quite a while.
I think Professor Samdong Rinpoche, who works very closely with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the Kanden Phorang Trust of His Holiness, said very clearly yesterday that, according to Tibetan Buddhism, science or, anything to do with the next reincarnation will be left only just before the Lama departs from this world. So it's not, as His Holiness now says, that he's going to live for more than 2 decades. So it's too early. You cannot say all these things 10 years, 20 years before your demise. So this is something that we have to wait till the eventuality happens.
Right, because the Dalai Lama himself has been quoted in the past to have not ruled out the possibility of a successor being a woman even. What do you make of this comment that he has made in 2012?
His Holiness has made many comments when he's asked whether the next Dalai Lama could be a woman. He says, so His Holiness says, why not? Because he always gives, when he talks about compassion, he always gives example of his mother and his mother's love to His Holiness himself and all the other children, just like any other mother in this world. So mother by nature are compassionate. So why not women Dalai Lama? That's also a possibility. There have been talks about emanation. Even the media is using succession and incarnation alternatively or by choice, I don't know. But succession is pointing more towards emanation, which means you appoint somebody before your demise. But reincarnation is looking for a new boy or girl after your demise. So this is the basic difference. So all these conversations have been there. And I was once asked by a senior politician in the West saying, you don't seem to have a process in place. And I said, this is your point of view, but some experts on China and India and Tibetans believe that what His Holiness has decided now is very smart, very intelligent, because one thing that China cannot handle is unpredictability. So if His Holiness does not decide anything concrete right now, there is nothing the Chinese government can do right now. And we also know for a fact that till the great 14th Dalai Lama is alive, there is nothing the Chinese government can do. So based on those thinkings and facts, we are working with the international community, within the Tibetan community, within the larger Buddhist world. So we are pretty well prepared.
Right, and Mr. Sering, when one walks in McLeodganj, one sees the large number of posters of the Panchen Lama, who's not been seen publicly since 1995. Allegations have been that the Chinese abducted him in Tibet, something that they've denied while appointing their own Panchen Lama in the same year. Is this constant interference the reason why Dalai Lama himself was worried about the continuation of the institution at one point?
Definitely, if His Holiness is reborn in Tibet or China, and if Tibet or China is not free, then His Holiness will not have the freedom to carry on his responsibilities. So that is the major concern and the reason why His Holiness says he will be born in a free world. And if you compare, I've mentioned this some years ago at a conference in the United States also, that I think the Chinese government made a very strategic mistake by not recognizing the same boy that His Holiness the Dalai Lama recognized in 1995, in which case they would have the real Panchen Lama in their hand. Now, when they appointed in their anger when they appointed their own young boy as another Tibetan boy as the next Panchen Lama. Now the Tibetans inside Tibet, if you ask them, they would say he's just another leader, and just to show their displeasure, they cannot sell the pictures of the Panchen Lama selected by His Holiness Dalai Lama. We don't know whether he's alive or not. And they don't want to sell the pictures of Chinese Panchen Lama. So to show their displeasure, they sell only the pictures of the 10th Panchen Lama, the previous Panchen Lama. That is how the Tibetans inside Tibet respond to this. In Tibetan tradition, when you meet with lamas, just like here in India, when you meet a guru, you make offerings to the guru. But right now, what is happening in Tibet is when Panchen Lama comes, Chinese government pays money for the Tibetans to go and receive him. Chinese government pays money to the Tibetans to go and listen to his teachings, force every Tibetan who's receiving funding from the government to make it obligatory to attend any of the programs that Panchen Lama is attending. So these are forced measures which you cannot make people comply with all the time. And this is not going to bring in compliance from the Tibetans, but more on the other side.
Right. And Mr. Sering, if we talk about India, we're seeing a July 6th event that's expected to be graced with several dignitaries, including Union Minister Kiren Rijiju, amongst others. Now, while India has revered the Dalai Lama, the government hasn't commented on the spiritual process of succession or reincarnation. How do you assess India's response?
When you have a Union Minister coming for the program, I think that itself reflects Indian government's position on His Holiness reaching the age of 90, and also in a way regarding His Holiness reincarnation. So even though India has not publicly made any statement, we know for a fact that India will always be on the right side of history when it comes to His Holiness reincarnation and the cause of Tibet. But the question is whether how vocal or visible does the Indian government want to become, because there are too many things on the table with China after occupation of Tibet by China. So let's see how things evolve. But I have always been saying we are very grateful to the government and people of India, because we also consider ourselves as an extension of ancient Indian culture and wisdom, because our script, Tibetan script, came from India, and now Tibetan is also one of the 15 oldest languages in this world, and Tibetan is the only language you can study Buddhism in its entirety, because we transliterated every available Sanskrit and Pali text into Tibetan from 8th to 13th century, before Buddhism almost vanished out of India. And we are proud to be a repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom. So we have those historical, cultural, linguistic ties with India, and India has been very generous in all humanitarian activities that the Tibetans here in India needs. And we exist only because of the government of India. So we have to also consider the sensitivities of the government of India, and we like to align our national interests with the national interests of India. And when the time comes right, I'm sure Indian government will also stand up on its own position.
Right, and we've seen the Dalai Lama advocating for the middle path. Tell us, do you believe that a complete independence of Tibet from China is a realistic possibility in the future?
When His Holiness talks about middle way, then he's not talking about independence from China or separation from China. In fact, His Holiness has been chanting middle way like we chant Om Mani Padme Hum all the time, middle way, and the Chinese government keeps calling His Holiness a separatist. So I tell the Chinese, who wants Tibet to be separated from China? Is it the Chinese government who keeps calling His Holiness a separatist? Or is it His Holiness who always keeps calling on middle way like a mantra? So these are some of the contradictions which are very evident in what the Chinese government is trying to say to the world, disinform the world, even on Tibetan history. So when His Holiness says middle way, then we are also talking about ends or polarities. Without ends or polarities, there cannot be middle way or Madhya Marg. So the polarities are one, the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, and the other is the present situation of occupied Tibet under the repressive Chinese government. And His Holiness is trying to seek a genuine autonomy, because His Holiness used the word genuine because the autonomy word is already there, Tibet Autonomous Region, prefecture, counties, but there's no real autonomy in practice. So this cabinet, led by me, we decided to change the strategy a little bit to gain recognition for the polarities. Without recognition for the polarities, there is no value or leverage for middle way. That is why we worked with the U.S. government, U.S. Congress for 2 years from 22 to 24 to get this Resolve Tibet Act passed in the U.S. Congress, and now it has become a law, signed into law by President Biden on July 12th last year in 2024. And this Resolve Tibet Act talks about, because Chinese government always says Tibet is not there's no Tibet problem, and the U.S. government is saying Tibet is yet to be resolved conflict and or dispute, and that the Tibet, it needs to be resolved under international law. The second part says the Tibetan people have the right to self-determination, which is very much in line with the UN resolution on Tibet in 1961. And then the third part talks about the disinformation on the part of Chinese government on Tibetan history. And the law says that His Holiness has not accepted that, and the U.S. government also does not accept the fact that the Chinese disinformation that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. So this is the first time that a government is going against the Chinese disinformation on Tibetan history. And the fourth part talks about the territory of Tibet, not just the Tibet Autonomous Region, but the larger traditional Tibet with all the 3 provinces in it. It's a contiguous territory with all the people speaking the same language, culture, and religion. So this is the step we have taken, one, to send a clear message to the Chinese government that they cannot distort history. History is in the past, or for that matter, any other government like UK, who had close relationship with Tibet when they were ruling India, in British India. So we have to tell the Chinese government they cannot distort history. We have to tell the international community that if they keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, they are going against international law, because what is happening to Ukraine today because of Russia's invasion and what happened to Tibet 76 years ago, it was the same international law. And then governments keep repeating the statement at the behest of Chinese government that Tibet is part of China, PRC. And then on the other hand, they say, oh, we appreciate negotiations between His Holiness representatives and the Chinese government. So I keep telling them, these are 2 contradictory positions. If all the governments keep saying Tibet is part of PRC, then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? You are removing the very ground for negotiations. And the third thing we tell them is, why do you think Chinese government are asking every government to say Tibet is part of PRC? Why not other regions like East Turkestan, Mongolia, or Manchuria? That's because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet, and they are trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community. So any government that repeats this statement is on the side of Chinese. They are not being neutral. And my question is, have you ever read Tibetan history in the first place? So the third reason why we go for this is also to tell the Tibetan population that if we don't study our own history, who else will? And the fourth reason is the polarity of independent seekers and middle way, which is the official position of the CTA within the Tibetan community itself. So I keep telling them it doesn't make sense to argue amongst ourselves. This will not going to resolve anything. So on the other hand, whether you are seeking independence, even if you are seeking independence for Tibet in the future, then you have to prove the independence of Tibet in the past. Just like through the middle way, we are reaching out to governments to seek recognition for the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. So we are on the same page right now. So in future, what will evolve will again depend on the reality of the global political situation in China and in Tibet. But it does open a lot of windows.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Penpa Sering, for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.